All right, for our next lightning talk, we have Nathan Savant. Hello, Nathan. Hey.
Hello, Alexi.
All right, you've made it.
Yay!
Nathan, narrative and game designer. You wrote "You Believe Actions Speak Louder Than Words," so I take that to mean you don't want an introduction.
I was planning my own, so it's fine either way, to be honest.
There you
so
go.
It doesn't matter.
Well, then take it away.
Thank you very much, Alex. So hi, I'm Nathan Savant. I'm a game and narrative designer, as she just said. I research film, books, and other storytelling media. Basically, I'm just trying to understand how to tell character stories that fit into gameplay, and how to design gameplay that fits into character stories, and everything involved therein. So this is going to be a pretty dense talk. I'm gonna apologize in advance, basically, for gonna have to go pretty quick through a lot of very deep subjects. We can talk more after, basically. So let's just dive right in. So procedurally generated stories, they're kind of a new frontier. It can be a little bit difficult to tell a story between all of your randomly generated pieces that you're making. Not only that, you're probably not really a writer yourself. You're probably programmers. You're probably working on solo projects, and you just have way too much to do already. So how do you fit a story in with all of your procedural systems? How do you procedurally summon the deep magics of satisfying storytelling? Well, to sort of answer this, we'll look at how the ancients do it. We'll look at Lord of the Rings, their quest structure overall. I'm going to cite some specifics along the way. Mostly, I'm going to keep things pretty high level. It's a short talk. I don't want to go into super technical details about anything. I'm going to keep all the terms and concepts simple as well. A hammer is a simple tool. You use it to build decidedly not simple things, right? So quests. Quests are stories. Because quests are stories, quests break down into 3 sections. You have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. Each of those sections of their story has particular needs, so we can break all those down into their component pieces to kind of understand how they work a little bit better. And obviously through the lens of Lord of the Rings. So let's start at the beginning. How does Frodo get the quest to destroy the ring? You might respond saying that Gandalf gives it to him. It's technically not true. Like, Gandalf gives Frodo the quest to deliver the ring to the elves, and then Frodo gives himself the quest to deliver the ring to Mordor once he kind of understands the situation more fully. So right there, we have 2 possible options. We have someone gives Frodo the first quest, and then Frodo accepts the second quest himself internally. And in both of those cases, Frodo accepts willingly, but a player might not, free will and all that. So how do we break all this down? Well, we end up with 3 groups of information. We have a type of response, which is, whether or not the player's accepting the quest, pretty much yes or no. We have the type of choice it was, which is were they, making a choice they were aware of, where they just kind of stumble into it. And then you have the mechanics of the acceptance, which is what did they actually do to accept the quest. So let's start with the type of response, because this is the simplest, and break that down. So Frodo accepts the main quest willingly, but he just as likely, in a game at least, might have refused the quest, right? If he were a player, he could have just said, well, did my job, good luck, folks, and then walked away. That's a valid response here. It's also valid if he had done that and then felt guilty later and come back. Or if he had tried to do that, and then Gandalf walks up to him and hits him over the head with a stick and says, no, get back in there. These are all valid, depending on the story, depending on the type of protagonist that you have, your characters, whatever. So let's write all that down as types of response when offered a quest. So you can accept the quest, you can reject the quest. You can reject the quest and then accept it later. And you can reject the quest and then be forced to accept it later. Each of those things will change how the rest of the quest is perceived, and thus will tell the story in a slightly different way without you having to necessarily write anything. Then the next piece of this to be aware of is, how was the quest offered? Did someone walk up to Frodo and say, hey, do you want a quest? Was Gandalf standing around with an exclamation mark over his head? No, but it's not too far off of that either. So Lord of the Rings starts with a very normal video game thing. Frodo accepts the first part of the quest when Gandalf asks him for help. That's easy. That's a standard quest giver situation. But how does Gandalf accept his part of this quest? Gandalf accepts his part of the quest by gaining some knowledge when he reads a bunch of old books, and he kind of realizes what he has to do. And this is another internal acceptance. But this time, there's no mention of a quest at all. He just gets the idea from some books, or scrolls, or whatever, as it were. And then as the story goes, there's a bunch of other characters who get a bunch of other different quests in a bunch of different ways. We can play a little bit fast and loose with the definition of quest here, because basically the triggers are the same anyway. But so you have quests that can trigger when a character enters a certain area. Like as an example, maybe you have to fight the giant spider because you enter its nest, right? So you have quests that can trigger because you interact with an object. Maybe it makes some noise and it just changes your quest because now you have to respond because people are aware that you're there, that type of thing. You can have other types of quests which are accepted because a character just has an item, and that's one's kind of the premise of the whole story, right? Like you put on the ring, you get this quest, you can't refuse, and completing that quest is bad for society at large, really. So basically, this all breaks down into 3 types of choice. You can make a conscious choice on purpose because you are offered more information. Oops, sorry. You can make an implied choice by walking into a space or doing some other action that accepts a quest without being aware of it. And you can have just no choice at all, and you're just destined to complete this particular task regardless of what you do or what your choices that you're making. So let's write all those down. You have the conscious choice, the implied choice, and no choice. And then the last part of all this are the mechanics of the acceptance. Those are the actions that you actually take. So do you accept the quest by talking to someone in kind of a traditional video game way? Do you accept the quest by interacting with an object in the world? Like maybe it's a job board or a treasure map that you get your quest from. Do you accept the quest by picking up an item or gaining some knowledge or entering a space, or maybe even just by using an action? Like maybe you cast a spell that's been deemed illegal by the magical authorities and now you're on the run, right? So those are all valid ways of accepting a quest. So let's write all those down. So you have interact with a character, interact with an object, gain an item, gain some knowledge, enter an area, and use a verb. And now with that, that's the beginning of the quest. We've covered every way that a quest might start. So what do we do when we're on the quest? What happens in the middle? Well, in this example, we have, basically think of the One Ring. Once you put it on, you've accepted the evil quest. This draws ring wraiths to you. As long as you have the ring on, you have kind of a status effect that flags you as a target for flying Nightmare Ghost King dudes. So what can we do to our game's protagonist? Well, what types of things can happen? And so you break down into 2 categories. You have internal struggles and external struggles. So external struggles are things which happen to around your character. You're already very familiar with these. These are just things like cutscenes, scripted sequences, just like the events that are happening kind of around your character or to your character, etc. These are things like environments which can change as part of a quest, like perhaps an army of orcs invades or the Ents march off to war, right? You have things like the ring wraiths, which are external gameplay elements, which change the way you have to interact with the world. You can't follow normal roads right now because the ring wraiths are after you. You also can't light fires either because they will see it. So your core gameplay has changed because of some, difference in, some mechanical change here, like something is out to get you basically. So let's write all of that out. Yeah, so that's the specific events, the cutscenes, sequences, etc. The environments that you go to, whether that's changing or just new places that you get access to, and then mechanical stresses, which are any kind of gameplay things like status effects or different enemies, those types of things. And then on the other half of this are the internal struggles. So the internal struggles are how those things affect your character's mental state. Wearing the ring causes these evil Ghost King dudes to come and hunt Frodo, but not wearing the ring causes Frodo to feel increasingly stressed. The more he resists the psychic pull of the ring, the worse his mind gets. So in games, unlike film or books, though, internal struggles are not just some abstract concept. In games, we actually represent them in a specific and concrete way. And that way is through the UI. This is what the UI is for. It exists as a means of communicating character state to the player. You can animate the UI to note that your character takes a blow to the head. Maybe they can't remember their skills right now. You can make somebody blind by blocking out their screen or just cover their eyes with something because they have something on their face, right? You can do the same with audio. You can block out the audio or distort the audio, and that changes kind of how your character is perceiving things. You can do all sorts of things here, basically. This is what the UI is for. We generally tend to only use the UI for health points, things like that. There's a ton of room here for different types of communication, if you want them, if they fit into the scope of your project, of course. And so if UI is communicating the short term, what about the long term? Well, character progression trees represent the type of person that your character can imagine themselves becoming. and that can change over the course of a story. So maybe you talk to a mentor and you unlock a new skill tree, right? Or maybe you suffer some trauma and you lose a skill tree, right? Maybe accepting a quest grants you a new skill for a short amount of time, or maybe you pick up a magical item and you get a new skill that way. A person's abilities can expand and contract over time as is necessary. As an example of this, we see the hobbits throughout the story. They all learn to use swords while they're out in the wilds, but throughout the entire story, their primary verb remains sneak. And then the most complicated way of communicating an internal struggle is through moment-to-moment gameplay. So The Last of Us has that moment where Ellie doesn't respond to you when you press a button, right? That's a mechanical representation of an internal struggle. Maybe your character no longer moves as they once did because they can't focus anymore. Maybe they can no longer distinguish friend from foe because they're just so angry. There's lots of design stuff you can do there. It's all very, very touchy. So you just have to be very careful. Like 99% of the time, changing the player's movement speed or the response to an input command is about the worst thing you can do to them. But it is a tool in your toolbox, so let's write that down. So we have UI animations of any kind, alterations, whatever. You have character progression, whether that's skill trees or abilities, and you have mechanical interactions, things like changing the inputs. And then with that, we come to the end. The end of the quest is the reward. So what is the reward for having done whatever the thing was? In other types of story, the reward is usually just a return to normalcy. So you've destroyed the ring, go home to the Shire, relax, get married, whatever. In games, this is also basically true. The alterations that you're doing to the game mechanics, the UI, etc., all those things I've been talking about, those are all exhausting. You have to apply these things very carefully and very much with intention. In Lord of the Rings, if you notice, the main quest is the only one that has significant alterations to the gameplay. Like the Palantir kind of slightly alters things. You have to carry an orb in a certain way. And then there's like lots of environment changes and like as kings become corrupt or whatever, and those types of things happen, but they aren't direct character effects. So basically, just be aware that anything you change about the interface is stressful to the player and pace accordingly. These are powerful tools, use them carefully. Also, if you're wanting to hear more about the sort of traditional roguelike or the traditional reward design in a game, I'm not going to be going into that so much. There's a million other talks that are going to go in way more detail than I ever could. So I'll leave that to them. And with that, that's the final graphic for me. So this is how you break down your quest into its component parts and hopefully do something a little bit more interesting than your average game manages to do. This is just a very simple set of examples from one book, obviously. I urge each of you to take the thought process here. Hopefully you can glean enough from it to apply this to your own favorite books, movies, TV show, plays, whatever. There's a lot you can learn from other media, and hopefully this is kind of showing you a little bit of how to do that. Feel free to ask questions if there's time left, and here's my contact information for anybody who wants it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I think that, Melanie put it directly. It's a very idea-provoking kind of framework. So, people enjoyed that in the skill tree metaphor. I think that it's got people thinking insofar as they're able to think at this point in the conference. So,
so far as anybody's able to think this far in the conference,
But no, it is really interesting. I know even when we saw the proposal, it's really cool to see that kind of approach applied to written narrative that is a novel. We cover a lot of strange topics in Roguelike Celebration. I don't know if we'd had like a quest analysis of a written novel before. So it's a first. So we could maybe fit one question if we had a chance. Oh, Kristen, you from the quest talk earlier. Sure. Do you think you can have a quest without narrative?
Sure. I mean, Mario. Yeah. I mean, define your definition of narrative, of course, but
yeah.
I mean,
Kristen
I think
did the definition of quest, but
right. Well, yeah, and that's a whole. I'll leave the semantics to her.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to get into the definition of narrative.